Perhaps we're going to delve into our book review segment of this morning. In Search of Nongqawuse is Treive Nicholas, a travelling investigation into the 1856-57 Xhosa Cattle Killing. Nicholas traces the story from the Wild Coast to a symbolic grave in England, interrogating whether she was a prophetess, a scapegoat, or a figure shaped by colonial violence, and really what her legacy also means for the Eastern Cape today. Treive now joins us virtually to chat a little bit more about his offering for our book review segment this morning. Good morning, Treive, and thank you for your time at this hour.
Good morning, Lizelle, and thank you for having me on the show to talk about this very sensitive and important topic.
Absolutely. And so we're going to get into the narratives and the framing and the story behind it. But I think before we delve into the merits of the book, tell us a little bit more about your own journey. What first drew you to the story of Nongqawuse? Describe the moment, that image that hooked you.
Well, you've got to start all the way back in 1980, because I used to work in the Transkei as a teacher to paraplegic children in Umtata at Treive Nicholas special school. So that was back in 1980. And then I decided to do some research on the history of Xhosa. And that's when I discovered this amazing story about a teenage girl who had allegedly caused the death of 40,000 of her own people. Yeah. And I couldn't believe it. I didn't know where the story had been hiding.
Well, Treive, so we're going to get into this because in chapter 6, as you mentioned, the pilgrimage begins. Let's look at reframing the girl who was known as having killed a nation. You deliberately move away from that simplified label often attached to Nongqawuse. Throughout the book, you begin to suggest that reducing her to a single act erases the context in which she operated in and what also transpired. You went through archives, you went through landscapes, the journey at large. Tell us a little bit more about now who you truly believe she was, why her history has been, why history has been eager to simplify her in that one single narrative.
I do think she's become the scapegoat. The first thing I did is I started reading lots of books. Then I actually got on an aeroplane during COVID and got down to the Eastern Cape, to the Nqaqa River, into the Colonial, and started literally exploring the landscape to see if I could see where these events had happened. Then I'd started to talk to people, and I realized that, are you seriously telling me this young woman was a person responsible? And I just wouldn't buy it. I thought it was an easy get out. The way I looked at it, if the cattle killing had been a success, do we think she would have got all the praise for it? Do you think she would have been held up as an esteemed young woman that had saved Xhosa? Yeah. No, she got sold the whole the pup. She was the one made responsible for the fail. But the question I kept asking where were all the responsible adults in the room? I understand it's a different culture. I understand it's a different time. But where was the chief, Takhili? He had responsibilities. Where were the colonials who were basically administering the region? Someone should have stepped in and addressed the situation. In fact, some of the people did try and resist it, but it was near impossible to resist. And so this unfolded.
And you know, Treive, that's the danger of a single narrative, and perhaps also who gets to write history as well. And so when we look at, in your book itself, where you show how land loss, colonial pressure, war, disease, already devastating the Xhosa people at the time during that 1856 period. And I wonder how we then need to understand what transpired by looking at the larger political and economic pressures that also existed at the time. Tell us a little bit more about how that tragedy or the prophecy was then used to push the society to a breaking point then.
So you've hit the nail on the head. Yeah. That's what I think at the nub of this. To understand the story, I would say you've got to take your 21st century hat off, and you've got to go back to the 1850s in the Eastern Cape. The Xhosa had been under huge pressure after 8 frontier wars. They'd had drought, they'd had cattle disease, they'd been undermined by magistrates and colonial administration. They tried to fight the colonialists, they tried to form treaties with the colonialists, and they tried to ignore them. And none of that worked. And so they were in a very desperate situation. So when the young teenage girl comes around and says, sacrifice your cattle, destroy your corn, get rid of witchcraft, it was started to make some sense. It was one opportunity to improve life, improve the situation.
Because
and one of the things I have to say to people is, this wasn't a new concept. Prophets earlier in the century, Makanda and Hele and Kearney, have both been talking about similar things. Cleanse society, get rid of the defiled cattle, get rid of the corn, a prophet will arise, and they will bring with them fresh cattle, fresh corn, and that the Abelungu, the Europeans, the white Europeans, will be driven into the sea. So her messages were falling on, I think, pushing to the slightly open door at that stage, because Xhosa were really at their wits' end about what to do about the encroachment of Europeans from the west into their land, which they were trying to use for grazing and for subsisting.
Yeah. There's definitely a semblance of politics of blame. And even if you look at the role of the landscapes in your research, the archives from missionaries as well, your investigation led you to Cambridgeshire. So tell us a little bit more how it stretches beyond South Africa into England, symbolically how it now links the two empires, but the consequences that the discovery also has for you in changing the emotional relationship of the story.
Sure. I actually want to just take that theme a second and just go slightly somewhere different with it,
Sure.
But I will come back to it, Cambridge. Sure. One of the things people said to me is what are you, as a white guy from the UK, doing exploring a Xhosa story? And I said, well, yes, I understand that, and I am sensitive to Xhosa culture. But I said, it's not a Xhosa story. It's not even a South African story. It's a world story. And that's one of the things I try to get across in the book is, yes, it's deeply sensitive and held in the Cape. Let's think about the French Revolution. Do only the French look at the French Revolution? Okay. No. It's a world story, and we learn from it. So coming back to Cambridgeshire, I spent a lot of time with the Border Historical Society, going around the Eastern Cape and exploring what Xhosa had been doing in the 19th century. And I came across this British Army officer called Sir Harry Smith, who had been instrumental in upsetting Xhosa chiefs. And lo and behold, when I go back to the UK, I find that this officer, Sir Harry Smith, had actually been present in my hometown of Winchester. And then I found out that he had actually been buried in the town of Whittlesea in Cambridgeshire. So I went off to find his grave and the grave of Lady Smith. And my story came almost 360 degrees. I spent a lot of time in South Africa exploring the Nongqawuse. Now I was here standing at the grave of Sir Harry Smith.
Sure.
And though he'd been bombastic, though he'd been dominating colonial history in the Cape, he was reduced to dust in a grave like everybody else in the story.
You know, Treive, just picking up on that point as well, just because you traversed obviously many lands far and wide, you also use the landscape as a witness. And this is where the intimate emotional part also came for you, because along the wild coast that you traveled, you sort of make the land a character itself, only because you describe the terrain with grief. There's still lingering grief about some of the unanswered questions as well. Tell us how physically walking those spaces, how it changed your interpretation of the historical record as well, what you witnessed, what you immersed yourself in as well. And just then going forward, right, with the information now, the episode changing the way you think about resistance and collaboration and survival under colonial rule, how has that now been reframed for you in your own journey?
Well, Lizelle, I'm so glad you said that, because you said the landscape is a character in this story. And I absolutely believe that. I've been and worked in the Eastern Cape many times, and the wild coast, the environment. If you go down to the Nkaha River, where these events happen, I called it nature's cathedral
Yeah.
because it literally was. You know, if you're a person that's going to have visions, if you're going to have spiritual events, then that neck of the woods down on the wild coast, it really is. It's quite breathtaking. And you can almost imagine it having a spiritual quality, so that when somebody comes back and says, I've had visions, the ancestors have been talking to me, the rivers and the sea are full of our ancestors, new people waiting to return. It doesn't sound too fanciful. Yeah, you in the studio, me in my office, it sounds a little bit unbelievable. In a 19th century context, in that stunning scenery, it doesn't seem so unbelievable. And so, yes, you're right. I think the scenery is an important component in understanding the story of Nongqawuse and why these events happened.
Well, Treive, I'm going to have to leave our conversation there. Thank you for putting thoughts to paper, for being part of this conversation start as we rewrite narratives as well, taking a journey into the past as well. Treive Nicholas, he wrote the book In Search of Nongqawuse, of course, just looking at that legacy and the story and the narratives around that, how it begins to get reframed for agency at large and the impact it also has on people in the Eastern Cape.